Okay, we can start.
Yeah. Okay. As far as I know, as far as I read in the questions that are asked, it's all about the place and the character of new museums in the world, in this area, and all over the world. So. Of course, I could talk about the whole phenomenon and with respect to what I've seen and during travels all over the world, but I realized that my perception is most of all a European one, and my real experience, okay, is situated in Holland, in the Netherlands. So let's say within a real European context. And very much characterized by the situation in Dutch architecture and urbanism. There are in this approach, there are a lot of similarities. There are a lot of things that I recognize. At the same time, I must say there is, compared to the most spectacular events and results elsewhere in the world, there is an enormous difference. This may seem a little bit strange because during the 90s especially, so let's say 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago, Holland was very strong in its architecture, in the exportation of its architecture, with spectacular book titles like Super Dutch and so on and so on. I must say there are a lot of people, and I am among them, who never felt very comfortable with this approach. So I realized that when I read this text, that I know, of course, the examples and the things this text is all about. At the same time, I realized that let's say my own practice and let's say my own approach, my own character, is a little bit opposing to the most spectacular and the most dominating examples. So I understand that, of course, the way we think about museum buildings in this period of time is, of course, very much an extravagant one, a very, sometimes a very hilarious one. Museum buildings during, let's say, the last 30 years or something have become a real mix of kind of solidity and cultural values, and at the same time you always see, or practically always see, very sensational approaches, or at least efforts that have been made to make sensational situations. I can't deny that for me the best museums in the world are the more modest ones, and modest ones in the way they offer an environment for people to enjoy art, whatever the type of art that's being considered, with a kind of logic in the environment, with a very good routing and in the first place maybe rather comfortable places. Instead of hilarious and spectacular things. And so, at the same time, this doesn't say that I don't like Bilbao, but there's somewhere in this text the words Bilbao effect have been used. For me, the real character of Bilbao and the Bilbao effect are more or less two completely separate things. I tremendously like the building. from because of the way it has been organized, because of the beautiful way people can wander around, can go from a dark place to a more lighter place. The way you very easily find your way over there. It's very easy to orientate for everyone, and both inside the building and in relation to the outside of the building. So you could analyze the building in that way without talking about the so-called Bilbao effect. But of course, this Bilbao effect is there and has to be considered and has to be taken into account separately, in my view, from the whole character of the building. And to talk about Dutch or the European culture and maybe even Dutch culture at this level, you have to recognize and to conclude that especially in Holland, buildings are absolutely more modest, maybe even more conventional. The most sensational, the most spectacular museums have been built elsewhere. Museums that are bigger, that have a lot more impact, etc., etc. So even a so-called Bilbao effect, you have to investigate in a way that you notice that there are different levels of it. A small building like this one, which is a very minor element in the whole story of modern museum building, but even this building had a kind of Bilbao effect in its context. So I can give several examples of that, showing that, for instance, that it changed the place over here, of course, and at the same time, especially in this time of internet and very easy international communication and information, this building being published after the opening of it in architectural magazines all over the world. Means that since 10 years we are famous all over the world, so-called famous, which is of course nonsense, but the image of the building has brought the message that we want to give to the world, really to all places you can imagine. So for me, that means that the so-called Bilbao effect is at the same time, it is there. You should analyze it. You should try to know what the real meaning of it is. And I don't know, for instance, if the meaning of the Bilbao effect in our case is more important just here around the corner, or somewhere in Australia or something like that. It can be the same or it can be totally different. So so there is kind of vagueness, and I think there is immediately this kind of fluidity of which we're talking later. But fluidity, which means immediately that this fluidity is not only talking of the forms of a building, but also of the perception of it, and the meaning of the fact that the expression of a building can be transported from one minute to the other to completely different parts in the world, where it will have its own meaning. So what we gradually speak about is the form of the building, for instance. I understand that the question is being raised whether formalism is and the more delirious forms of formalism are very characteristic for our times. I must say formalism has always been there. you should absolutely notice that there are different types of formalism, that it can be a way of just giving a museum its very specific character. It can also be a very minor detail in a way that it can attract the attention towards a building during the time of the opening, which we saw, for instance, with this whole series of German museums in Frankfurt and Stuttgart in the 80s, when it was obviously that when you were interested in architecture at that time, you absolutely had to go to Stuttgart and Frankfurt to see the most recent buildings, and every building was a statement to attract people, to show what the architect was capable to do, and so on and so on. In Rome, the Maxi Museum is of course not so much a statement apart as well. It's that it's of course it is showing the showing off the work of Zaha Hadid, which we all know. So giving the commission to make a museum to Zaha Hadid is something that predicts already that you will have finally you will have a spectacular building, and so on and so on. And a very nice example of the architecture products that Zaha is capable to make. For me, the Mercedes-Benz building by Ben van Berkel and Caroline Bos is somewhat different, because it is more introvert, and it seems to have, in my opinion, a stronger character of its own. So on the forehand, you could say, kind of a prediction, that on the long term, the Mercedes-Benz Museum is more interesting than the Maxi Museum, because its solidity, its firmness, it's the way formalism has been used in a very modest way. I again use the way of modesty, the word of modesty. Talking about formal deliriums in that way has to find its nuances. You have to say that formal exuberancy is, well, there's nothing against it, but it's most of all the character of the time in which it is being realized that determines whether it is exactly the right thing to do, or the opposite, or something in between. And next to that, you really have to analyze where, on which basis formalism has been produced. I can tell that for instance, this building, which seems to be a very, very strange element in this context, and for a lot of people, it is something new and something spectacular, something provocative, and so on and so on. Basically, it is a very, very traditional building. The concept of it is very traditional. It's just a building with 3 floors, with built in a situation in which the amount of space was limited. There were clear limitations to it. The architect has responded to those limits, and all people who call it a blob, for instance, don't understand what it is, because it's just the intersection of very traditional, very clear and already very old forms, like the rectangular form and the cone, for instance. And So it is a very logical building in a way, and with forms that are the result from a very clear analysis of the available space at this spot. Talking about liquid modernity, it's I always tremendously liked the term, because it is so very clear what you mean with it, and what the author that invented this term meant by it and wanted to say with it. And there you, of course, you talk about a process, about the expression of a process, which reveals how the architect, or let's say the builder in general, has been thinking about what he or she wanted to realize, and so on. You say, if you're talking about liquid forms, the interesting thing is that you could say every building is in a way liquid. Only the traditional building, or the 19th or maybe even 18th and 16th century buildings, they have kind of a liquid character of maybe 0 or a little bit more than 0. And then there are buildings that are so-called 100% liquid, which is never true. So every building is in between. And form, interpretation, the way we use it, the way it has been perceived, they all are part of processes which you could call liquid. And this to me, maybe I'm very, it's very disappointing for you to hear this, but of all kind of terms, like the Bilbao effect, like liquid architecture, and so on and so on, I practically always oppose a little bit, or sometimes I oppose a lot, because I think it's not so different from other things you want to see or what you find. Of course, we have to find names for things, because we have to be able to talk about architecture, and so the names are very useful, but there's always a huge amount of relativity in the value and the meaning of the terms. And so for me, for instance, there is an incredible difference between this building, the approach of the architect that made this building, René van Zuuk, a young Dutch architect, and Ben van Berkel's approach of architecture. There's an enormous difference in the character of the architect, or in the character of their works, of their products, of the museums they make, etc., etc. Differences in the approach of the situation, of the analyzing of the problem that has to be solved, the context, the use of the way you can integrate a building in a context. There are incredible differences, and yet it is so similar for me. So you have to really notice that. And talking about very unconventional museum buildings in this period of time is a little bit strange in itself. I mean, you're from Brazil, so and you're even from Sao Paulo. Well, the most spectacular museum I know probably is the Lina Bobardi thing in Sao Paulo, which is the most conventional box you can think of. So, talking about liquid architecture, the use of this building shows a lot of liquid elements, and the way you perceive art in this building, in its context, the relation between inside and outside in that building, and the way you walk around and so on and so on. It's so liquid, and yet the box is just nothing more than a box. I think that's basically the thing I would like to accentuate. Now, done in that way, talking about architecture and space events, of course, when Bernard Tschumi started to talk about that and started to explain his approach from that point of view, it was the time that he needed to say that. And it was a time in which you could say, well, in the period before, we were lacking a little bit the element of the space event. 20 or 30 years later, it's completely different. I mean, all over the place we have space events. So maybe we should just sit down a little bit and start to think things over. And what is very characteristic is that in almost all the careers of interesting architects, you see a kind of flow. You see, so they are young, they are very creative, they are enthusiastic, and they start thinking about new things and this and that and that, and they do spectacular things, and in one way or another, and then they grow older, like me, and then they say, well, is this the way you should think about the world as well? Huh? And in this way, well, one of the most spectacular examples is what Rem Koolhaas at the moment is doing, who is still building the most crazy things that have been prepared 10, 15, 20 years ago. And if you listen to his texts at the moment, he is just a little bit, or not only a little bit, but settling down a little bit, thinking about basic values, much more about the very important things that you should realize at this moment. And there is, at this moment, it's beautiful to see an enormous contradiction between what the architect Rem Koolhaas has made in the previous period of time, and what he is saying and thinking at the moment. Of course, there is there's continuity, and but it doesn't surprise me. So it is a kind of development. So this with having said that, I think I already answered the question what should be the place of the museum in a dynamic world, etc., etc. It is clear that and you see it every day, and here in Amsterdam you see it beautiful in the way the I Film Museum and the Stedelijk Museum for Contemporary Art are dealing with space and with all the things we are talking about. Basically, the Stedelijk Museum of course, it has a very strong character and a very formalist and nice and spectacular thing on the outside. Inside, it is just very calm, very silent, very traditional in the way that that the extension of the existing building deliberately got the character of the old thing. That is different, very different from the Stedelijk Museum. So, for instance, in Amsterdam, it is at this moment possible to analyze two very different buildings in what you could see as two different situations, although they have been built in one and the same cultural context, namely this European city Amsterdam. The beautiful thing is that the Stedelijk Museum, with its rather calm environment, is a huge building. You could say rather traditionalist, because it has been created. The modern museum is an extension of an old building, of an old, let's say, more very conventional building, and it is expressing in all its elements, in all its details. It is it has this character of stability. It is a very stable building. It is a very quiet building. There is symmetry. There is one and the same environment all over the place, and at the same time, the architect has taken care of making a very, very clear building. It is, in that way, you could compare it to Bilbao. It has more or less the same idea of giving the people the opportunity and the chances and the possibilities to just not only to wander around, but to know where they walk, to know the succession of spaces, to recognize the succession of spaces, and to feel and to realize that you are part of a very logic route through the building. Now, if you compare this with the NDI Film Center, of course, only even the exterior of the building and the way it presents itself, the presence of the building on the edge of the water in a very dynamic environment, spectacular in the way it is situated on the sun at the north bank of the IJ, the water of the IJ. At the same time, a very contradictory building, because in this situation, full of light, with spectacular sunlight all over the place, you make a film museum with 7 dark rooms, with 7 cinema rooms. So in that case, I admire absolutely the way the architects have been able to make a building which is kind of a shell protecting this film environment against the outside world, at the same time opening it from underneath, so giving the audience and the public all around the impression that approaching the building, you have the impression, or you can have the impression that you just like a little chicken and its mother, that you're approaching the building and go find your protection under the feathers of the mother chicken. So there is a beautiful relationship between inside and outside, from outside, but also when you're inside and looking out. And you are constantly aware of this idea that you are in an environment in which you can wander around. So probably people call it very dynamic. At the same time, you can just sit down and have a very comfortable time. But the main idea is that you, in a kind of an umbrella, giving you the possibility to enjoy, even in this situation full of light, the pleasure of seeing films in the dark. So these two buildings, you could compare them. They are both museums. There are places you can have a drink, wander around, enjoy all kinds of things, and at the same time they are absolutely different. Are they space events? Yes, I think so, but very different space events. Are they conventional? The Museum of Film maybe less than we probably, most people will say no, it's not that conventional, and the Stedelijk Museum is more conventional. At the same time, you realize that all those terms are very, very relative. That it's not always very, very clear when you should use them and whether you should use them, and so on and so on. What is, of course, very, very important is that both buildings show how valuable and how important it is to build the right thing in the right context, making use and profiting really from the spatial possibilities which means, for instance, that at the Stedelijk Museum on Museumplein in the south of Amsterdam, the view is not that interesting from most sides, while in the Film Museum you should absolutely use this as an architect. You should use this the beauty of the views and the basic dynamics of this place, where all kind of ships and even very tall ships are just passing in front of the building. So it's the two are very different in both spaces. In both spaces, you should talk of a different spatiality and related to both the context and the contents of the building and so. And well, this can be done in an incredible amount of ways, of course. This can be done in a very spectacular way. It can be done in a very modest way. The fact if it creates a Bilbao effect, once again, in both cases in Amsterdam, no, absolutely not. Maybe for the I Film Center a little bit more than the Stedelijk Museum, but the Stedelijk Museum was, while it is a brand new building, it is the confirmation of an old situation, because the museum has always been there. And in the north, at the Film Center I, it's you could only say that it creates an opening towards a part of the city that for a long time was forgotten, was being forgotten, and which is now has got a kind of new attractiveness and so on and so on. But even there, I never would talk about the kind of this Bilbao effect, or else you should use it in whatever situation you think of. Now, I already said, of course, much about Amsterdam, about the European situation, and there I literally to talk about the museum building in the world. I literally, yeah, I think I would need to repeat myself and to mention a lot of other museums, just to show that this is true. The most beautiful museum I ever saw, the most recent museum, is a museum, and that's very strange, of which I don't remember the name now. It is in San Francisco. This is a tragic thing. A beautiful museum by Herzog and de Meuron from Switzerland, in the, what is it? I can't remember the name.
You can stop and try to.
That's very strange. It's 5 years old or something. In this huge park in San Francisco. I will talk about that later. Maybe it's nevertheless it's the most interesting to explain the situation where we are in right here, because it is very characteristic for at least the Amsterdam situation, and I think for more places in the world. Here at ARCAM you are once again in a very small building, only 600 square meters, so which is nothing, and but which tries to be a very provocative and energetic center for architecture, with exhibitions, debates, and so on and so on. So all around us are at this moment 7 very important cultural centers, and this cluster of 8 cultural initiatives has been grown in less than 10 years. So if you look around at this environment, this spot very near Central Station in Amsterdam, in a very important context, and a very accessible context, because from here to the airport is only 15 minutes or something like that, and at the same time you are in the city center of Amsterdam. If you look around here, you see the Naval Museum, National Naval Museum, in a very old building that is standing there since ages, since more than 300 years. Then you have the Science Center, NEMO, which has been built on top of the most important tunnel towards the north, right in the middle of this area, in the middle of the water. Designed by Renzo Piano. Then there's a Center for Contemporary Art integrated in the old historic architecture at the edge of it, and in front of that are the new huge new library with all kinds of cultural facilities. The Amsterdam Conservative for music. The Muziekgebouw aan het IJ, which is a building especially for the practice of contemporary music, and the Jazz Center, which is called the BIM House. Now all those, apart from the Naval Museum and the center, the Appel Center for Contemporary Art, which are housed in old traditional architecture. All the other things are brand new, have been realized in, let's say, in the last 10 to 20 years, and they all have got they all show the characteristic form of the age in which they have been constructed. So the Naval Museum is a very stern building. The Contemporary Art Center, the Appel, is being housed in a very neutral facade. Renzo Piano made a kind of spectacular green building in the middle, which is nice because it is the center of this cluster of buildings. And all the others that have been realized, including the ARCAM building, just are there, I think, all of them good responses to the immediate environment, and are expressing more or less, and we never really have been thinking about that consciously, but are expressing a kind of the idea of teamwork. The fantastic element here is that the water is the connecting element, so that if you're really standing in the middle of it, you see all 8 institutions all around with all their own character, and in a very strange way expressing this kind of being part of a team. And that is, of course, then once again an element of which you could say, yes, that's interesting. Talking about the Maxi or the Gehry building in Bilbao, or this Herzog de Meuron, it's called the De Young Museum in San Francisco. I remember it. I'm sorry I forgot before. It's the De Young Museum, which I admire as being one of the most beautiful museums I know. All those buildings, of course, did not have the possibility to show themselves as being part of a team. They were all unique things in their own space, right in the place where they alone determine or dominate the character. And that's once again, and that's maybe the most characteristic overall view I can describe, where the building in itself is, of course, expressing what it is, what it should be, what it has to offer to the public, what it is in its connection to the physical context, to the cultural context, and so on and so on. And you really can invent all forms that are possible to achieve what you want to achieve. I think that's more or less my story.